A millionaire discovers he's bankrupt on his wedding day, and what his fiancée does is shocking. Lucas Anderson was used to having the world at his feet. He wasn't just any millionaire. He was the millionaire. His life was what many could only dream of. At 35, Lucas had achieved everything: a successful career, an immense fortune, and a fiancée who looked like she stepped out of a fashion magazine. Emily Scott, the bride, wasn't just a stunning woman, she was the perfect complement to his flawless life. Together, they were the dream couple. Today was the big day, the wedding the entire New York society had been anxiously awaiting, the kind of ceremony that would make any other look small and dull. Everything was set: exotic imported flowers, a lavishly decorated venue, and the most distinguished guests one could imagine. For Lucas, it was just another event where he would be the center of attention, something he was completely familiar with. But something was wrong. As Lucas adjusted his tie in front of the mirror, a sense of unease consumed him. Over the past few days, he had been getting persistent calls from his lawyers. Business, he thought. It can always wait. And up until that moment, he was sure of it. Nothing could be more important than his wedding. However, as he looked at himself in the mirror, something seemed out of place. Perhaps it was the tension in the air, or the fact that his phone wouldn't stop buzzing, interrupting his thoughts with constant vibrations in his pocket. Ignoring the disturbance, Lucas took a deep breath. Today is my day. Nothing will ruin this. Or so he thought. On the other side of the door, John, his best friend, was excited, ready to help him head down to the altar. The world outside continued to be perfect. Eager guests, ready cameras, and photographers capturing every moment of the event of the year. But just as Lucas was about to open the door, his phone buzzed again, even more insistently. He paused. Something inside him told him this wasn't a normal call. Reluctantly, he picked up the phone. The name Thomas, his lead lawyer, flashed on the screen. Lucas hesitated. He could ignore it as he had done so many times before, but something made him answer. "Lucas, we need to talk." Thomas's voice was different. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. "Thomas, today's not the day. I'm about to get married. This can wait." "No, Lucas, it can't wait." The pause on the other end of the line was too long for comfort. "The deal with C&C Corporation, it's fallen apart." For a moment, Lucas didn't understand. "What? The investment? The funds? We lost everything." Lucas was silent. His hands grew sweaty, and the phone nearly slipped from his fingers. Lose everything? No, that wasn't possible. He had built his empire on a solid foundation with the best advisors, the best business partners. Nothing could collapse like that. "What do you mean by lost everything?" he whispered, trying to stay calm while his heart raced uncontrollably. "C&C went bankrupt, Lucas. And all your money went with them. There's nothing we can do." Each word from Thomas felt like a blow. Lucas's heart sank. Everything he had built, his entire empire, gone. He blinked, still standing in front of the mirror, trying to absorb the information. That morning, he had been one of the richest men in the country. Now he was bankrupt. "So what do I do?" The question slipped from his lips almost without him realizing. It was a thought he had never had before. Lucas Anderson, the man who always had all the answers, now didn't know what to do. "We need to meet right away to come up with a strategy. I'm on my way to the wedding venue." Thomas hung up before Lucas could respond. Lucas slowly turned toward the mirror, looking at himself, but the reflection staring back at him was no longer that of a confident man. It was the reflection of someone lost. He saw himself standing there, dressed in an expensive suit, at a wedding that no longer made sense. His heart was racing, and he knew he had to make a decision. The door burst open, and John walked in with a big grin on his face. "Hey, champ, ready to conquer the world once again?" Lucas forced a smile, but inside he felt like the world was crumbling around him. He looked at John, unsure if he should tell the truth or go through with the ceremony, pretending that everything was fine. After all, what would Emily say? How would she react if she found out the man she was about to marry had just lost everything? Lucas glanced at the hall where the guests were already beginning to take their seats, completely unaware of what was happening behind the scenes. He had everything anyone could want, but at that moment, he realized it could all vanish in the blink of an eye. The question was, what would he do now? Lucas Anderson felt like he was trapped in a nightmare. The wedding, the event he had always seen as the crowning moment of his perfect life, was about to turn into an unimaginable disaster. Everything he had built, his reputation, his fortune, his power, seemed to be unraveling right before his eyes. And he couldn't stop it. Outside, the sound of guests laughing, chatting, and clinking glasses only increased the tension. They were all eagerly waiting to witness the wedding of the year. For them, it was just another display of luxury and glamour. For Lucas, it was the beginning of a collapse. His heart raced, the words of Thomas still echoing in his head. "You've lost everything." How could that be true? How could he, one of the most successful men in New York, lose absolutely everything in a single moment? It was surreal, but the growing fear in his chest told him it was real. "Lucas, are you ready?" John's carefree voice, his best friend, brought him back to reality. Lucas slowly turned to him but couldn't say anything. How could he tell the truth? How could he explain that, at the peak of his success, his life had fallen apart so brutally? He knew he had to be honest with John, with Emily, with everyone. But he couldn't. The fear of public humiliation, the fear of everyone seeing him for what he really was, a broken man with nothing, paralyzed him. He turned toward the door that separated him from Emily, feeling the weight of that walk. On the other side, the woman he believed he would spend the rest of his life with was waiting, probably making the final adjustments to her flawless wedding dress. She had no idea about the chaos that was about to unfold. Just as Lucas was about to open the door, it suddenly swung open. Clarissa, one of the bridesmaids and a close friend of Emily's, rushed in, her eyes wide with urgency. "Lucas, we need to talk." The urgency in her voice made Lucas's heart pound even harder. "What is it?" he asked, his throat dry, feeling like the ground was opening up beneath him. "Emily? She's heard rumors that something's wrong, that your business isn't doing well. She wants to know the truth." Clarissa stared at him, expecting him to deny it. Lucas's world seemed to spin faster. Time was running against him. Emily knew. Somehow, the news of his bankruptcy had leaked before he could even tell her. He had a choice. He could lie to try to save the ceremony, or admit everything and face the consequences. Lucas knew that, at this moment, there was no more room to hide the truth. "Where is she?" he asked, his voice faltering slightly. "She's in the preparation room, waiting for you," Clarissa said, giving him a worried look. "Lucas, you need to talk to her now before things get worse." Lucas walked past Clarissa, feeling the weight of the walls around him. Each step toward Emily felt heavier than the last. He stopped in front of the door, took a deep breath, and entered. Emily was standing with her back to him, facing a large mirror. The reflection showed an impeccable bride, carefully adjusting her veil. She looked so perfect, so calm, as if nothing could disturb the perfection of the moment. But Lucas knew that calm was about to be shattered in an irreparable way. Emily turned when she heard the door close. Her eyes, once full of anticipation, now looked dark, as if she already knew what he was about to say. She stayed silent for a long moment, watching Lucas with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. "Lucas, what's going on?" Her voice was low, controlled, but Lucas could feel the tension behind her words. Lucas struggled to find the right words. How could he explain what had happened so quickly? How could he tell the woman he was about to marry that there was nothing left, no fortune, no security, no guaranteed future? "Emily, he started, but the words seemed stuck in his throat. He took a deep breath and forced the truth. "I've lost everything. The business collapsed. I'm bankrupt." The word bankrupt hung in the air like a death sentence. The silence that followed was suffocating. Emily stood frozen, as if the news had physically struck her. She blinked a few times, trying to process what she had just heard. "What?" was all she could manage at first. "What do you mean bankrupt? How could that happen?" Her voice rose, the control she was trying to maintain starting to crumble. Lucas stepped forward, trying to explain. "It was a financial collapse, something we couldn't foresee. C&C Corporation went under, and with it, all our money. I really don't know what to do." Emily stepped back, her face twisting with disbelief and anger. "You lost everything?" The disbelief in her voice was clear. "How could you let this happen, Lucas? How could you bring me here, knowing you're bankrupt? You lied to me, to all of us." Lucas tried to get closer, but Emily backed away, her eyes now filled with fury. "And what do you expect me to do now?" she shouted, her voice echoing through the room. Stand by you while you start over from nothing? Live a life without luxury, without anything? That's not what you promised me, Lucas. Lucas felt a tightness in his chest, her words piercing his soul. He knew there was more at stake than just money. He knew that how she reacted now said more about their relationship than anything they had ever been through. What did she really want? The man he was, or the lifestyle he provided? Before he could respond, Emily turned sharply, throwing the bouquet to the floor in anger, and looked at Lucas with disdain. Then, without another word, she turned and started walking out of the room. Lucas stood frozen for a few seconds, but soon her voice echoed again. I can't do this. I can't marry someone who has nothing, she said, loud enough for the people outside the room to hear. And so Emily left, leaving Lucas alone, stunned and devastated. The murmurs of the guests outside grew louder as they began to realize what was happening. In just a few minutes, what was supposed to be the most luxurious wedding of the year had turned into a scene of public abandonment. Lucas, in shock, could barely process the surprised looks and whispers as Emily walked past them, tearing off her veil and tossing it to the ground before disappearing through the door. Standing there, Lucas felt like he had lost more than just his fortune. He had lost everything, his reputation, his pride, and now, the woman he thought would be his partner for life. Lucas stood in the middle of the room, still processing the devastating sequence of events. He could hear the growing buzz of the guests, the sound of low voices mixed with Emily's hurried footsteps as she left the venue. Outside, what was meant to be the celebration of a dream wedding was quickly turning into a spectacle of public humiliation. He felt the weight of failure like never before. It wasn't just the money that had slipped through his fingers. It was his reputation, the respect he had always commanded, and now, even the woman he thought he loved had abandoned him. Everything was falling apart before his eyes, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Lucas took a deep breath and slowly walked out of the room where Emily had confronted him. He could feel the eyes on him as he walked down the hall, the whispers among the guests, the faces he once knew as friends and business partners, now looked at him with a mix of surprise and disapproval. On the other side of the room, John, who still knew nothing, found him. His usual smile had vanished as he began to realize the chaos that was unfolding. He approached Lucas with a worried expression, trying to understand what was going on. "Lucas, what was that? What's happening?" John asked, clearly confused. Lucas didn't know how to respond. He was surrounded by people, and with every passing second, more and more guests were looking in his direction, waiting for him to say something, to offer some kind of explanation. But how could he explain that? In just a few hours, his life had crumbled to pieces. "Not here, John. Not here," Lucas murmured, his voice tense and exhausted. He gestured for John to follow him outside, away from the curious stares and unspoken questions. The two of them walked through the side doors of the hall, leaving behind the restless whispers. The cool air outside brought a brief sense of relief to Lucas, but the reality of his situation quickly caught up with him. He knew he would have to tell John, someone he trusted, someone who might understand what was happening. "What was that, Lucas? What was Emily talking about?" John repeated, this time with more urgency in his voice. Lucas took a deep breath, still trying to gather his thoughts. The silence between the two stretched for a few seconds that felt like an eternity, until he finally spoke. "I lost everything, John. All my money, the business, the investments, everything." The words were hard to say, as if speaking them made the reality even more painful. John stared at him in silence, absorbing the information. He opened his mouth to speak, but the disbelief seemed to have caught his words. "How did this happen?" John finally asked, still stunned. "The C&C Corporation, it went bankrupt, and I lost everything I had in it." Lucas looked down at the ground, the shame heavy in his voice. "And now, Emma left me. She doesn't want to be with me without the money." John shook his head, still trying to process it all. He had known Lucas for years, and he had never imagined him reaching this point. Lucas had always been so confident, someone who seemed to have everything under control. Seeing his friend now falling apart felt surreal. "What are you going to do?" John asked, his voice filled with concern. Lucas didn't have an answer. For the first time in his life, he didn't know what to do. He had always had a solution for everything, always knew how to navigate problems and come out on top. But this time, it was different. This time, he was completely lost. I don't know, Lucas admitted, his voice faltering. I don't know where to start. Everything I was, everything I had, it's gone. He ran a hand through his hair, trying to push away the despair that was beginning to take over. John watched his friend in silence for a few moments before placing a firm hand on Lucas's shoulder. We'll start over, John said, simply but with determination. It won't be easy, but you're not alone in this. We'll figure something out. You'll get back on your feet, Lucas. It might take time, it might be different, but you'll come through this. Lucas looked at John, feeling a small ray of hope for the first time amidst the darkness. The idea of starting over seemed impossible, but maybe, just maybe, he could find a way to rebuild his life. It wouldn't be easy, but with John's support, he might be able to take the first steps to get back up. I don't know where to begin, Lucas murmured, feeling the weight of uncertainty. John gave a slight smile. First, let's get out of here. You don't need to face all those stairs today. Let's go somewhere quieter and figure out what to do next. Lucas nodded. He knew John was right. Staying there, surrounded by people who would only see him as the bankrupt millionaire, wouldn't help him at all. He needed space to think, to start accepting his new reality and plan the next step. As they walked away from the wedding venue together, Lucas looked back at the hall that should have been the stage for the happiest day of his life. Now, all that remained was emptiness and silence. The sound of laughter and celebration had faded, and the darkness of the night was beginning to surround them. Each step he took alongside John was a reminder that, from that moment on, everything would be different. He had lost everything. But maybe, just maybe, there was a chance to start again. Lucas wasn't entirely sure how he had ended up there. The last week had passed in a blur. He left New York shortly after the wedding disaster, feeling more lost than ever. The city that once revered him now felt oppressive, full of memories he didn't want to face. So, when John suggested that he take some time away, Lucas didn't hesitate. Now he was in a small town in the countryside, far from all the luxury that had once defined his life. The place was simple, almost humble, surrounded by fields and old houses. The slow pace of the town contrasted sharply with the hustle and bustle of New York, but Lucas needed this. He needed space to breathe, to process what had happened, and to figure out how to begin again. Lucas settled into a small rented house. No grand mansions or luxury cars, just a bed, a table, and a chair. For someone who had been used to the best that money could buy, the simplicity of his new life was a shock. But in a way, it was also a relief. No one there expected anything from him. He was just another man trying to move forward, to keep himself busy, and more importantly, to keep from going crazy with his own thoughts. Lucas took a temporary job at a local restaurant. The owner, a middle-aged man named Frank, had no idea who he was, and Lucas preferred to keep it that way. He didn't want anyone to know about his past life of luxury and failure. The work at the restaurant was simple. Lucas cleaned tables, served customers, and helped in the kitchen. For someone who had once run million-dollar businesses, the work seemed mundane, but at the same time, it gave him a sense of purpose that he hadn't expected. However, the weight of his former life was still there, always lingering in his mind. The contrast between who he was and who he had become was hard to ignore. One of the biggest challenges, though, was dealing with his own arrogance. Lucas had always seen himself as someone superior, someone destined for success. Now, he was just an employee at a small-town restaurant, serving people who had never heard of him. And that bothered him more than he cared to admit. But the work at the restaurant also brought something unexpected, a new perspective. And this shift began when he met a woman who worked as a waitress there. Sarah was unlike anyone Lucas had ever known. She was practical, determined, and above all, genuine. She didn't care about status or money. To her, what mattered were the little things: honesty, hard work, and most importantly, living authentically. At first, Lucas didn't know what to make of her. He was used to people flattering him, treating him with reverence. Sarah, on the other hand, treated him like any other coworker. She wasn't impressed by him, and that unsettled him. At the same time, there was something about her attitude that intrigued him. For the first time, he found himself surrounded by people who expected nothing from him but honesty. One night after a long day of work, Lucas and Sarah were cleaning up the restaurant. The silence between them was comfortable, but at the same time, Lucas felt the need to speak. "Have you ever wondered what you'd do if everything went wrong?" Lucas asked suddenly, without thinking. Sarah stopped what she was doing and looked at him, surprised by the question. "What do you mean by that?" she replied, curious. "If you lost everything, if your life turned upside down overnight, what would you do?" Lucas insisted, his voice quieter than usual. Sarah thought for a moment before answering. "I think I've lost everything once," she said simply. "And here I am, aren't I? Sometimes losing everything is what makes us realize what really matters." Lucas fell silent, taking in her words. It was strange to hear someone speak so openly about something he had been struggling to process for weeks. But at the same time, Sarah's words seemed to carry a truth he couldn't ignore. "I had everything, you know?" Lucas confessed without looking directly at her. "And I lost it all. I don't know how. I don't know how to start over." Sarah watched him for a moment without judging, just listening. Then, with a gentle smile, she said, "Maybe you're thinking too much about what you lost and not enough about what you can gain." The simplicity of that response struck Lucas in an unexpected way. He had always focused on what had been taken from him, the fortune, the status, the security. But Sarah, with her practical and straightforward view of life, seemed to see something he couldn't. The value of simple things. Things that money couldn't buy. That night, as he walked back to the small house where he now lived, Lucas began to reflect on Sarah's words. Maybe there was something in this simple life that he hadn't yet realized. Maybe in some way this was the fresh start he so desperately needed. But to find it, he would have to let go of the man he used to be and begin accepting the man he was becoming. The days Lucas spent working at the restaurant started to pass differently. Life, which had once seemed like nothing more than a series of defeats and disappointments, began to take on a new shape. He still carried the weight of his fall, but gradually he was learning to live with less expectations, less luxury, and surprisingly, fewer worries. And most importantly, he was learning to live with more simplicity, more authenticity. And of course, there was Sarah. There was something about her that affected Lucas in ways he couldn't yet fully understand. Sarah seemed to have a natural lightness, an ability to deal with problems directly without carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. Unlike anything he had known before, Sarah wasn't interested in money, status, or appearances. To her, life was about what you did with what you had, not about what you owned. Lucas didn't know when he started feeling something more for her. Perhaps it was on an ordinary afternoon while they were cleaning the restaurant together, or maybe when he noticed her smile while serving customers. Always genuine, always real. The truth was that Sarah was beginning to occupy a place in his thoughts in a way he couldn't control. On a Friday night, after a long day of work, Frank decided to close the restaurant early. Sarah and Lucas offered to help clean up before heading home. The night was cool, and the silence in the small restaurant felt more comfortable than ever. They worked side by side in silence until Sarah unexpectedly broke the quiet. "So, Lucas, what are you going to do now?" she asked, without taking her eyes off the counter she was wiping. The question seemed innocent, but Lucas knew there was something more behind it. She was trying to understand what was going on in his head, just as he had been trying to make sense of his own feelings. He paused for a moment, setting the cloth aside, and looked at her. "I'm not really sure. I guess I'm still trying to figure out who I am without all of that," he answered honestly, something that wasn't easy for him. "And you? What would you do?" Sarah stopped what she was doing and looked him in the eyes, this time with a more serious expression. After a brief pause, she said, "I've done that once before, Lucas." Her voice was quieter, and there was a weight to her words. "I've already had to figure out who I was without anything." Lucas remained silent, surprised by the confession. He had never imagined that Sarah could have gone through something similar. She always seemed so at peace with her simple life, so sure of herself. But for the first time, he began to wonder what she had faced before coming here. "What happened?" he asked, trying not to sound intrusive but curious enough to understand what lay behind her calm demeanor. Sarah smiled slightly, but it was a sad smile. She continued cleaning the counter, as if the words were hard to say. "I grew up in a wealthy family. My parents had big businesses, a lot of money, a life of luxury," she began with a nostalgic tone. "But it wasn't exactly a happy childhood. Everything was about status, about keeping up appearances, about being perfect. In the end, I felt like I didn't really know who I was. I only knew what people expected of me." Lucas watched her closely. Sarah's story was surprisingly close to his, but with one key difference. She had chosen to leave that world behind. "And then?" he asked, trying to understand what made her leave that life. Sarah sighed. "When I was 23, I decided I didn't want that life anymore. I left everything behind. My parents told me I was being ungrateful, that I'd never survive without their money. But I knew that if I stayed in that life, I'd become someone I didn't want to be." Lucas felt an unexpected connection to her story. He had always believed that money was the key to happiness, but now, listening to Sarah, he started to realize that maybe what he had always valued wasn't as important as he thought. "Was it easy?" Lucas asked, with a hint of irony in his voice. Sarah laughed softly. "No, not easy at all, but I'd rather live with less and have more of myself. That's how I learned to value what really matters. And you, Lucas? What matters to you now?" That question hit Lucas in an unexpected way. What did matter to him now? He had spent so many years of his life chasing success, status, and financial security that he had never stopped to ask himself what truly mattered. But looking at Sarah in that moment, he started to realize that maybe the answers he had been searching for were right there, in the simplicity she embodied. "I'm not sure," he admitted, his voice soft, "but I think I'm starting to figure it out." The silence that followed was filled with unspoken meanings. Lucas realized that, for the first time in a long while, he was being honest with himself and with someone else. There was something about Sarah that made him want to be a better person, a more authentic person. Sarah smiled again, this time more gently. "I think that's a good start, Lucas." That night, as Lucas walked home, he couldn't stop thinking about the conversation he had with Sarah. What she had revealed about herself, the courage she had to walk away from everything and start over without regrets. And most importantly, how at peace she seemed with the choices she had made. Maybe that was what he needed. Maybe that's what had been missing, the courage to leave the past behind, to reinvent himself, to accept that he could be someone different without needing money to define who he was. But there was something more. Something Lucas didn't want to admit to himself, but that was becoming clearer with each passing day. He was starting to feel something for Sarah, something deeper than just admiration. And though that scared him, it was also the most real thing he had felt in a long time. The days following Sarah's revelation were marked by a noticeable shift in Lucas's mind. He had spent so much time living a life that seemed defined by his possessions and how the world viewed him, that now, seeing Sarah, he was forced to rethink everything. What truly defined him? Who was he without his wealth? And more importantly, who did he want to become moving forward? His time with Sarah was becoming more natural. They worked side by side at the restaurant, and their conversations, once occasional, had become deeper and more frequent. Lucas found himself thinking about her even when she wasn't around. Sarah's calmness, her strength, the way she handled challenges, it all made him reflect on what truly mattered in life. However, as Lucas tried to adjust to his new reality, an unexpected offer appeared, bringing back the world he thought he had left behind. Thomas, his former business partner, managed to track him down in the small town, and the encounter stirred a mix of emotions that Lucas wasn't prepared to face. "Lucas, we need to talk," Thomas said, as he walked into the restaurant on a busy afternoon, his presence completely out of place in the simple surroundings. Lucas was surprised to see him. For a moment he felt a wave of shame and anger as he recalled how everything had collapsed because of the failed investments. But there was something in Thomas's tone that seemed different. He wasn't there to relive the past, he was there to offer something new. They sat at a table in the corner, away from the curious eyes of the customers, and from Sarah, who was busy serving another group. "What do you want, Thomas?" Lucas asked bluntly. He no longer had the patience for the power games and status-driven conversations that had once marked their business interactions. "I came to offer you a way out," Thomas began with a confident smile. "I have a new investment opportunity, something big. If you join me, we can recover your fortune. And this isn't small. I'm talking about getting you back to the top." Thomas's words hung in the air, filled with promises and possibilities. For a moment, Lucas felt that familiar rush of power, the adrenaline of being involved in something grand. He could regain it all, the fortune, the status, the life he once knew. It would be so easy to return to the world he used to dominate. But then, he looked around. The simple restaurant, the life he was starting to build there. And most importantly, he looked at Sarah. She was across the room, smiling at customers, moving with the same natural ease as always. In that moment, Lucas realized the depth of the choice he had to make. If he accepted Thomas's offer, it would mean leaving everything behind. The simplicity, the authenticity he was beginning to discover, and possibly his connection with Sarah. He knew that if he went back to the business world, to the world that had defined him before, he'd be diving back into the very thing that would pull him away from who he was becoming. "I won't lie, Lucas," Thomas continued, noticing the silence. "I know things haven't been easy for you. But you're a businessman. You know you can bounce back. You can become who you were. So what do you say?" Lucas looked Thomas straight in the eyes. He knew this decision wasn't just about money. It was about who he wanted to be. He could go back to being the old Lucas Anderson, the powerful man, the millionaire everyone admired, but who he now realized was someone empty inside. Or he could continue down this uncertain yet more genuine path. "I don't know if I want to be that man again," Lucas finally said, his voice low but steady. Thomas frowned, clearly surprised by the response. "What? Are you serious? Lucas, this is your chance to get back to the top. What are you doing here? Cleaning tables? This isn't you." Lucas took a deep breath. He knew Thomas wouldn't understand, but that didn't matter anymore. He knew that if he accepted this offer, he would lose something much greater, something he was just beginning to comprehend. "Maybe this is who I am now," Lucas replied calmly. "I've learned that there's more to life than money and status. Maybe you're right. Maybe I am cleaning tables now. But for the first time, I feel like I'm truly living." Thomas shook his head, incredulous. "You're making a mistake, Lucas," he said, his tone laced with disdain. "You're throwing your life away." Lucas smiled, but there was a certain sadness in his smile. He knew Thomas wouldn't see things the same way, but he also knew this was the right decision for him. "No, Thomas. I think for the first time I'm doing something right." With that, Lucas stood up, leaving Thomas sitting alone at the table. He walked toward the door, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. There was a new lightness in his steps, a sense that finally he was in control of his own life. Before leaving, Lucas glanced over at Sarah. She was busy, as always, but when their eyes met, she smiled at him. A simple smile, but one full of meaning. And in that moment, Lucas knew he had made the right choice. He left the restaurant, feeling the cool afternoon air, certain that while he had left the past behind, the future awaiting him was far more promising than any fortune he could regain. The fresh morning air greeted Lucas as he stepped out of the restaurant that afternoon. The weight of the decision he had just made still lingered, but to his surprise, he felt no regret. There was a sense of peace he hadn't felt in a long time. For the first time, Lucas chose what was right for him, not what others expected of him. As he walked through the quiet streets of the small town, Lucas reflected on how much his life had changed. He had arrived there as a broken man, lost and without identity. Now he had a new perspective on what really mattered. It wasn't money or power, but the simplicity and authenticity he was discovering day by day. As he approached his rented house, Lucas realized that his thoughts kept drifting back to Sarah. Since she had shared her story and her past with him, something had changed. Lucas felt a deeper connection with her, something he had never experienced before. He knew that, beyond any internal transformation, Sarah was one of the main reasons he was starting to find himself again. Later that night, Lucas returned to the restaurant. Sarah was finishing her shift, cleaning the tables and tidying up the place as she did every night. When she saw him walk in, she gave him a calm smile, unaware that something significant had happened that day. "Here for dinner?" Sarah asked, raising an eyebrow as she approached. Lucas chuckled lightly. "Actually, I came to talk," he said, looking at her with sincerity. Sarah stopped what she was doing and crossed her arms, intrigued. "About what?" Lucas hesitated for a moment, searching for the right words. But as he looked into Sarah's eyes, he realized he didn't need any grand speeches. He just needed to be honest. "Thomas came to see me today," Lucas began, watching her expression subtly change. "He offered me a chance to get it all back. The money, the status, the life I had before." Sarah remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "I turned it down," he finished, without hesitation. Sarah blinked, visibly surprised. She hadn't expected that. Lucas, the man she had known as an ex-millionaire looking for a fresh start, had turned down the chance to return to the top. "Why did you turn it down?" she finally asked, her voice calm but filled with curiosity. Lucas took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the answer on his lips. "Because that's not who I am anymore," he said with conviction. "I used to think money defined who I was, that without it, I was nothing. But after losing everything, I realized I was wrong. What really matters can't be bought." Sarah watched him closely, considering his words. There was a depth to what Lucas was saying that resonated with her on a personal level. She knew how hard it was to walk away from a life of luxury and wealth, and hearing Lucas speak so sincerely made her admire him even more. "And what really matters to you now?" Sarah asked, with a soft smile. Lucas stepped closer, feeling his heart race a little. He knew the answer to that question was simple, but at the same time, it was filled with meaning. He looked directly into Sarah's eyes and said, "What really matters to me now is being honest about who I am and what I feel." He paused briefly, gathering his courage before continuing. "Sarah, you are one of the reasons I'm rediscovering who I really am. And I feel that, with you by my side, I can continue to be the best version of myself." Sarah stood in silence for a moment, absorbing what he had just said. A gentle smile appeared on her lips, and she took a small step toward him. "Lucas, I've seen you change since the moment you arrived here. And to be honest, I feel something for you too," Sarah admitted, her voice low but clear. Lucas's heart raced. This was a connection unlike anything he had ever experienced before. It wasn't about money, status, or power. It was something much simpler, and at the same time, much deeper. It was about being real, being vulnerable, and embracing what truly mattered. They stood in silence for a few seconds, the restaurant around them seeming to disappear. There was no need for more words. Lucas stepped forward and without hesitation took Sarah's hand. She looked at him, and in that moment, everything seemed to fall into place. They didn't need grand promises or declarations of eternal love. What they had, right then and there, was enough. It was real. The following week, Lucas made the decision to stay in the small town. He didn't know exactly what the future held, but he knew he was on the right path. He had made peace with his past and was learning to value the present. Alongside Sarah, he had found a new way to live, one that was simple yet full of meaning. One day, as they walked together through the fields, Sarah turned to Lucas and asked, "Do you think you would have made this choice if you hadn't lost everything?" Lucas paused for a moment, reflecting on the question. He knew that if he hadn't gone through what he had, he probably never would have met Sarah or learned the lessons that now defined him. "I think sometimes you have to lose everything to find what really matters," he replied, smiling at her. Sarah smiled back, and the two continued walking side by side with the future ahead of them. A future that, for Lucas, was now clear. It didn't matter how much he had lost in the past, because what he had found was far more valuable than any fortune he could have imagined. Months passed since Lucas Anderson made the decision to turn down Thomas's offer and follow a different path. It wasn't easy, and he knew that. Starting over would always be a challenge, but over time, Lucas realized he was stronger than he had ever imagined. He had let go of his obsessive desire for money and status and had instead begun to build a life rooted in authenticity and honesty. Although he didn't have the same fortune he once did, Lucas managed to rebuild. He had invested in small businesses in the town, with the help of John and a few new friends he had made. They weren't million-dollar ventures, but they were stable and respectable. Lucas now had a balanced financial life, working with purpose, and every decision he made reflected his new understanding of what was truly important. Sarah remained by his side. Her steady presence and the simplicity with which she approached life gave Lucas the assurance that he had found something far more valuable than any amount of money. Together, they had created a routine that, while far from the luxuries of his past, brought a peace he had never known existed. However, the past didn't seem ready to let him move on so easily. On a sunny Saturday, as Lucas was preparing for another day of work at the restaurant, he heard a knock at his door. He got up, opened the door, and to his surprise, saw Emily standing there. His former fiancée stood before him with the same anxious eyes he had known in the past, but something had changed in her expression. There was a mix of regret and desperation that Lucas didn't recognize. "Lucas." Emily's voice trembled slightly, a tone he had never heard from her before. She seemed hesitant, as if she was trying to find the right words to say. Lucas stood in silence, watching her closely. There was a palpable tension in the air. He hadn't expected to see her again, not after the way she had left him at the altar without even looking back. But there she was, like an echo from the past he was trying to forget. "What are you doing here, Emily?" Lucas finally asked, his voice firm but controlled. Emily lowered her head for a moment before looking up, her eyes now filled with emotion. I'm sorry, Lucas," she began, her voice faltering. "I made a mistake, a big mistake when I left you. I was scared, confused. I didn't know what to do when you told me you had lost everything. I thought that, without the money, without the life we had planned, there was nothing left for us. But now I see that I was wrong." Lucas felt a mix of emotions run through him. On one hand, he had expected to hear something like this someday. Emily's betrayal had hurt him deeply, but time had healed much of that pain. On the other hand, he couldn't ignore the coldness with which she abandoned him, choosing financial security over love. "You left me at the altar, Emily," Lucas said calmly, but with a weight in his voice that made it clear how deeply that moment had affected his life. "You didn't hesitate. You didn't give me a chance to try to explain. You just walked away." Emily shook her head, tears beginning to fall from her eyes. "I know. I was selfish. I was immature. I thought money was all that mattered, and when it was gone, I panicked. But now I understand that." She took a deep breath, trying to control her tears. "That what really mattered was you. And I lost you, Lucas. I want to fix things. I want to come back to you." Her plea hung in the air, heavy with tension. Lucas looked at her, feeling a wave of nostalgia mixed with a hint of compassion. Emily wasn't the same woman she used to be. Maybe time had been hard on her too, forcing her to see the emptiness of her choices. But that didn't change the fact that Lucas had moved on. "Emily," he began, his voice gentle but firm. "What do you think would have happened if I had regained my fortune that day? If I was still the man you knew, with all the money and status, would you be here now, or would you be with me only because of that?" She remained silent, unsure how to respond. Lucas knew the answer was obvious, but he didn't want to hurt her more than necessary. "You're here now because I've rebuilt my life. But this time, without the luxury, without the excess. And now, I'm building something real, something that doesn't depend on how much money I have in the bank." He paused, letting his words sink in. "I'm not that man anymore, Emily. And frankly, I don't think you understand what that means." Emily opened her mouth to say something, but the words seemed to escape her. She finally realized that the man standing before her was someone different, someone she may have never truly known. "I'm sorry," she murmured, the tears still falling. Lucas stepped forward, but instead of pushing her away with bitterness, he looked at her with compassion. "Emily, I hope one day you can find what really matters. It's not the money that defines you. It's not the luxury or the life you think you need. You have to look within yourself and discover what truly makes you happy, not what you think will give you security." She nodded slowly, tears falling freely. Lucas knew she had understood. Perhaps for the first time, she was beginning to see life from a new perspective. But the truth was, it was already too late for them. Without saying another word, Emily walked away, heading toward the road. Lucas watched her until she disappeared from view, knowing he had done the right thing. The past, at last, had been left behind. A year passed, and the most important moment of Lucas's life arrived. He stood at the altar, but this time next to someone who embodied everything true that he had discovered. Sarah, in a simple and elegant white dress, stood by his side, smiling with the same lightness that had won his heart from the very beginning. Around them, friends and family gathered to witness the simple and intimate ceremony. There was no pomp or excessive luxury. It was exactly how Lucas had always imagined it should be: genuine, authentic, and filled with love. As Sarah spoke her vows, Lucas felt a deep sense of peace wash over him. He had found everything he had ever sought, not in great fortunes or successful business ventures, but in the simple and sincere love of a woman who saw him for who he truly was. Not the man society had dreamed of, but the man who, with his flaws and his history, had become someone better. After the ceremony, Lucas and Sarah were greeted with warm hugs from their friends, including John, who smiled as if he had known all along that things would end up exactly like this. And beside Sarah, Lucas saw the future unfold before his eyes. They were not alone. Two small babies, twins, rested peacefully in a stroller beside the altar. Their children, the result of the love that Lucas and Sarah had built together. Lucas looked at his children and then at Sarah, feeling more complete than he ever thought possible. He had found the true wealth in life: love, family, and inner peace. Nothing, absolutely nothing, could compare to this. And so, as the sun set on the horizon, Lucas knew that despite all he had lost, he had gained something far greater. He didn't need the past to define his future. Everything he needed was right there beside him, in Sarah and the children who now gave meaning to it all. And this time, he knew he had found what truly mattered. Do you think Lucas should have forgiven Emily? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear what you think. Your participation means a lot to us. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Thank you for watching.